For today, I'll be discussing about Piaget's theory regarding developmental growth and Freire's theory regarding liberation pedagogy. Let's talk about Piaget's developmental growth. Jean William Fritz was a Swiss psychologist known for his work on child development. He developed his theories by watching children and making notes about their progress. The core idea of Piaget's theory is that children develop by acting as a little scientist. They explore and interact with the world to understand people, objects, and concepts. They do this naturally, even without the help of an adult. That's why Piaget, he called the little youngs as little scientists. So we will discuss 4 stages of cognitive development, its key concepts, and how people can use them to help children learn and develop. So there are 4 stages of cognitive development according to him. So first is the sensory motor stage, birth to 2 years old. Next is the pre-operational stage, ages between 2 to 7. And then we have concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11. And the last one is formal operational stage, ages between 11 and up. 0 to 2 years. So from birth to 2 years of age, an infant begins to understand the world around them by using their senses and bodily movements. Experts call this a sensory motor stage. So from the word, when we separate sensory motor stage, we have the word sensory, which means the senses, using of senses, and the motor is for the bodily movements. So at first, a baby uses their basic reflex movements such as sucking and waving their hands to explore their environment. They also use their senses of sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing. So as a little scientist, they gather information from these experiences and learn how to differentiate between people, objects, texture, sights, and how different situations make them feel. The most advanced cognitive achievement a child reaches during this stage is what we call object permanence. So object permanence is see it or it's hidden. This is when an infant understands that an object still exists even if they are not able to see, smell, touch, or hear it. This is very important because it means that the infant has developed the ability to form a mental image or representation of an object rather than merely reacting to what they experience in their immediate environment. So a good example of object permanence is during a playtime. So remember when we have younger brothers or we have cousins or relatives that are too young between ages of 0 to 2, we usually play them peekaboo. A good example also is that when we play a baby hiding, we used to hide a teddy bear in our blankets, and then the child searched for it, and then he realized that the teddy bear is just behind the blanket. That is one of a good example of object permanence. The second stage of cognitive development is what we call pre-operational stage. This is between ages 2 to 7. At this point, child develops memory, she develops imagination, and she develops symbolic thought. At this stage also, a child builds an object permanence and continues to develop abstract ways of thinking. This includes developing sophisticated language skills and using words and behaviors to represent objects or events that they experienced in the past. stage also, the child has an inability to accurately assume or understand any perspective other than oneself. This is what we call egocentric. A good example of egocentric is that when a child loves eating cookie, he thinks that everybody likes to eat cookie. And for example, this child wants or really loves to watch cartoons, for example, SpongeBob. He thinks that everyone in the family loves to watch SpongeBob. During this stage, the child displays these 5 key behaviors. So let's take a look at these 5 key behaviors. So first, imitation. This is where a child can mimic someone's behavior or even when the person they are imitating is no longer in front of them. A good example is that when you're playing a child, you let her see your tongue is out and then she mimics that regarding the tongue out. So makabantay mo kung magtudlo ka sa baby nga magka ng mamila, then maiyan ang makuan sa iyang mahin nga mamila na siya, even if wala na siya nakakita sa imuha. The moment nga i-ask mo siya nga mamila sad siya sa imuha. So that is a good example of imitation. Another one is symbolic play. A child starts to use objects as symbols, projecting the properties of one object into another. For example is that pretending a stick as a sword. So kung kanang makabantay mo, when a child is playing, magkuan-kuan siya nga, kintay ang stick yung makita, ginakuan niya nga sword na siya, or a ballpen nga yung makita, ginakuan niya nga sword niya, or a wand. That is when a child develops symbolic thinking. So, symbolic play. Nagduwa siya. Also, at this time, kung makabantay mo, kani nga age 2 to 7, mo na siya ang time nga mahilig ang bata nga magduwa-duwa, murag mga magpa-pretend nga duwa, magpa-pretend siya nga superhero, may nana. Mo ni ang katong mga times nga mag-role playing siya sa iyahang kuan, magduduwa siya nga intahay siya doctor siya, yan na ang yang doll is ang patient in ani nga times siya, ani nga ages. Another one is drawing. Drawing involves both imitation and symbolic play. It begins as scribbles and develops into more accurate abstract representations of objects and people. So for example, ang bata, padrawingon nimo about family, murag magkuan siya mga, kabantay mo ka nang magdrawing og kanang murag mga sticker, mga figure, and then markuan niya nga na ay ulo ang papa, na ay ulo ang mama, then na ay bata, then magunit ang mama sa bata, murag makuan niya sa drawing nga, naa siya yung mga symbolic nga representations, and then makuan niya nga, kato nga iyahang gidrawing is, kuan siya, family to siya, inana. Next is mental imagery. The child can picture many objects in their minds and they may ask the names of objects often to secure these associations in their mind. So, magkuhan na siya ani, daga na kay siyag mahuna-huna, daga na kay siyag makuan sa iyahang mind, iyahang ma-imagine, ani nga stage sa bata. So, next is verbal evocation of events. The child can use language to describe and represent events, people, or objects from their past. The third stage of cognitive development is concrete operational stage. This is ages between 7 to 11. At this stage, the child understands logic, understands reversibility, and understands the concept of conversion. The concrete operational stage is another major turning point in a child's cognitive development. Because the child builds on and masters abstract thought, they become less egocentric, meaning dili na sila self-centered, and more rational. Makakuha na sila, maka-reason out. During this stage, the child acquires the ability to develop and apply logical, concrete rules to objects, but not to abstract concepts, because this comes in another stage. So, kuha na siya, katong kuhaan sa next level na to siya. This includes a better ability to classify objects into groups and subgroups, the ability to understand logical order such as height and weight, and understanding of conservation. So, let's take a look at an example of a video regarding conversion. So, let's watch this.
So first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass? They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here. Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice in it.
So from the video, conversion is the understanding that an object can change in size, volume, or appearance but remain the same object. So makita na to sa video nga naka-understand na kani nga age na maka-understand na siya nga although gi-transfer ang katong water into another size of water, I mean another size of glass without spillage, makakuha na siya sa iyang mind nga wala na change ang volume sa tubig. So at this stage maka-understand na sila ani nga concept. The fourth stage of cognitive development is the formal operational stage, ages 11 and up. So at this stage, the child can use symbols to understand abstract concepts. Makakuha na siya mga abstract concepts. Kato akong gi-mention ganiha. Then, she can now use logic to come up with creative solutions to problems. And then, she can think multiple variables and come up with hypotheses. In the formal operational stage, this is the final stage of cognitive development, a child learns more sophisticated rules of logic. They can use logical to understand abstract concepts and solve problems. The child is now able to analyze their environment and make deductions. So they move beyond to the limits of understanding objects and facts towards problem solving. This involves creating theories about what is possible based on their existing knowledge. Sa akong mention ganiha nga, they can think of multiple variables and come up with hypotheses para makasolve sila og problem. So there are several important aspects of cognitive development that Piaget proposes as part of his theory. So we have here schema. Schema is a category of knowledge or a mental template that a child puts together to understand the world. This is a product of a child's experiences and can represent objects, events, or concepts. For example, a child can develop a schema of a dog. At first, the word dog only refers to the first dog they met. So, over the period of time, the word dog comes to represent all dogs. So when a child is putting this schema together, they may call a very furry, four-legged animal a dog before they master the category. So in addition to creating a schema, children can adapt their existing schemas based on new experiences. As a child ages, they form more schemas and adapt existing schemas to allow them a greater understanding of the world. So in this sense, schemas are a way of structuring acquired knowledge. So assimilation is where schema to understand a new object or situation. While accommodation is where a child adapts a pre-existing schema to fit a new experience or object. This process, ang accommodation, is more challenging than assimilation. So these are the two key concepts related to schemas. So for example, balikan na tutong katong regarding sa dog nga iyang nakitaan. So first, ang bata makabalo siya nga, uy, mauday ni dagway sa dog, balhibuon, inana. So kung bata pa lang siya, ang iyang schema is that ang dog balhibuon. So kung wala siya aning duha, as in, wala siya accommodation, dili niya ma-adapt ang pre-existing schema niya to fit sa new nga niya mga experience, dili siya kabalo na ang dili day tanang animals dog ang pangan, dili tanang animals nga naay balhibo dog. So with the accommodation, markuan niya nga si dog di ay is only one of those animals nga naay balhibo. So kani ang dagway sa dog, mo na dagway sa cat, inana siya mo ni dagway sa goat. So mo ni siya ang murag makuan sa bata nga ma-develop niya from time. So important concept is what we call equilibration. So equilibration motivates a child to continue through the stages of cognitive development. So when a child experiences assimilation, their worldview is inaccurate and they are in a state of disequilibrium. So this motivates the child to accommodate new information to reach a state of equilibrium. So mo to akong gi-mention ganiha regarding assimilation and accommodation. Important concept is constructivism. So that a child build their own knowledge for their world through a process of creative intervention. So how to use Piaget's? Number one, we will encourage children to explore and experiment. So one example of this is the example in the PDF that our professor give to us. So ang example nga naa sa ato ang reference is that si Nancy ni watch sa iyang mentor nga si Miss Walker nga nag-engage siya sa ka-lesson. So this was one of the several lessons about the importance of DNA duplication during cell division through a process called mitosis. So the students had some background already regarding the subject because the topic that Miss Walker will be discussing kay na sila some background reading in their text but no other preparation. So si Miss Walker asked Nancy if how she can approach the subject if kadto mao iyang klase. So Nancy wasn't certain. He would include in a laboratory experience, but no introducing the topic and deciding points of emphasis would be difficult. So, teaching was more challenging than Miss Walker made it look. So, Miss Walker introduced the lesson with a series of questions. She started with broad questions. So, nautan na siya, what makes each of you unique? So, kaya about man ang topic about DNA duplication. So, siya, what characteristics do you have that seem to link you to your mom and dad, your brother or sisters? And then, how do you explain similarities and differences? So the students wrote their initial understanding in their notebooks, and then Miss Walker showed a video that explained the basics of mitosis in simple plant and animal cells. So it illustrated genes composed of particular DNA strands, and showed the normal sequence of pairing of substances in DNA in detail. So, nag-class discussion dayon sila. And then, si Nancy watched the discussion. Some students were confused. So, nangutanang ubang students about evolution of Darwin's theory. Another one asked about cancer. Kaya di ba mag-duplicate. And another about mutation. So, one student inquired about the balance of genes and the environment. Still, other ones wanted to focus on what they had to learn to pass. So, si Miss Walker, wala gid siya na-disturb sa tanang questions sa iyang students. She recorded the questions on the board, and then she divided the class into small groups to search some answers. So, each group had to explain how the duplication of DNA strands related to their question. So, their groups would bring their work to class to the next day to summarize and clarify findings. After a review by Miss Walker, each group would present their information to the class. So, during the conference hour that followed class, Miss Walker explained siya kay Nancy what she thought both content and process were important. So, nauta na siya yung sa hinahuna-hunaan ni Nancy, both content and process were important. So, she wanted to be sure that content was correct, but also wanted the students to learn to find the information they needed and to apply it to the problem at hand. So, makita na to nga, gigamit ni Miss Walker ang mga ang naa sa cognitive development nga giingon ni Piaget, like katong niana siya nga kanang si Miss Walker gialaw niya iyang students nga mag-solve sa problem nga ilang nakita. So mo ni siya ang mga good example. So she wanted the students to learn to think. Miss Walker also wanted students to know how such knowledge might apply to them and their family. So, diri na makita nga gialaw ni Teacher Walker ang mga students to develop reasoning, to develop abstract thinking, logical thinking, tanang mga dapat i-think sa student, tanang nasa child nga ma-develop niya in relation to Piaget's theory. So, when using Piaget's theory, as I've mentioned katong example ganiha, individualized instructions so that children can learn at their own level of readiness. And then, we have to design the classroom as learning center stocked with concrete materials that children can touch, manipulate, and use. So, to summarize, Piaget's theory of cognitive development had a significant impact on how people understand childhood development today. So each stage includes a certain milestones where the child demonstrates a more sophisticated understanding of the world. So Piaget believes that development occurs through a continuous drive to expand and adapt schemas or understanding about the world. And now let's move on to Liberation Pedagogy of Freire. Paulo Freire developed philosophy liberation of pedagogy. He said that literacy meant more than learning to read and write. It raised people's consciousness about conditions of their lives, especially those that exploited and marginalized them. So he wrote the book on Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Born in 1921 and grew up in the northeast part of Brazil, where his experience deeply influenced his life work. The world economic crisis forced him to know hunger and poverty at a young age. So one of his book he recalls in one of his book that he did not understand anything because of his hunger. He was damned and he wasn't lack of interest. His social condition didn't allow him to have an education. So experience showed him once again the relationship between social class and knowledge. So because Freire lived among poor rural families and laborers, he gained a deep understanding of their lives and of the effects of social economics on education. Freire's pedagogy of literacy in education involves not only reading the word but also reading the world. So sa pasabot niya, dili lang kay puro basa, dapat makasabot gyud tag unsay kalibutan. So this involves the development of critical consciousness. So in a Portuguese, Freire's pedagogy of literacy in education involves not only reading the word but also reading the world. So sa pasabot niya, dili lang kay puro basa, dapat makasabot gyud tag unsay kalibutan. So this involves the development of critical consciousness. So in a Portuguese, conscious de cajao. This is about being conscious and critically aware. The formation of critical consciousness allows people to question the nature of their historical and social situation to read their world with the goal of acting as subjects in creation of a democratic society. For education, he implies a dialogic exchange between teachers and students. We're both learn, both question, both reflect, and both participate in meaning making. So to use Freire's theory, teachers should develop a critical consciousness of real power relationships in the schools and of the conditions that affect the students. This pedagogy begins with the teacher mingling among the community, asking questions of the people, and gathering a list of words used in their daily lives. Teachers and students must engage in an open and ongoing dialogue. So the teacher must begin to understand the social reality of people and develop at least a list of generative words and themes which could lead to discussion in classes. So by making words or literacy relevant to the lives of people, the process of conscientization could begin, in which the social construction of reality might be critically examined. So teacher must differ from banking form of education. So meaning sa banking form of education is that, meaning to say sa banking is that ang teacher ang naay knowledge nga i-impart sa estudyante. So kung mag-discuss si teacher, si kuan ra gyud ang purpose ra gyud is ma-deposit sa teacher sa mind sa student ang iyang gitudlo. For example, na siya i-discuss and then mao to yang ipa-exam or hinana siya. But Freire believe nga an open dialogue between teachers and students must be developed kay dapat equal sila, open sila sa usag-usa to interact with each other, and then kung naaman gani problem, ma-resolve nila agad. So the vital component to bring about this liberation from the oppressors is to tap into critical awareness, an awareness that individuals hold in their own thought must evolve, thus creating an educational dynamic where the teacher and the student rubric is more of a partnership than a hierarchy. So walay kuan, dili taas si teacher, dili ubos si student. So kuan sila, they will work hand in hand, they will work as a partner to create an educational dynamic nga mas nindot. Dynamic nga mas out how the oppressed suffer from a fear of freedom. So therefore, crippling critical consciousness as this fear levels the oppressed chain to their oppressive situations. So si Freire, nag-work siya to transform teaching and learning from the limited concept of transmitting information to engaging into the project of completing one's identity and meaning in a world that needs to be made more equitable, humane, and just. So maura gid nay kuani Freire, gusto niya na walay gidagdaog ug walay mananaog. So what is my regarding Piaget's theory? So yes, I agree about sa katong 4 stages of cognitive development. However, there are certain points nga kanang murag I beg to disagree. For example, ang kanaganing specific nga iyang gipanghatag nga mga ma-develop sa child sa mga ages nga iyang gihatag. Kay because I believe nga dili really exact ang mga ages nga iyang gi-mention. Kay naatay makita sa 0 to 2 years old nga pang 2 to 7 na, ginana gani. So naay mga na-develop na si 7 to 11 years old nga dapat 11 to up na. Katong ganing mga natay mga bata nga kanang medyo So sa theory ni Piaget, wala po siya nag-mention nga about this age mao ni iyang na-develop nga kuan kay wala niya gi-relate kung unsay development sa bata for example naa siya yung mga influences in ana. So wala niya gitakol nga ang kani nga development makuha ni siya because of naa siya influence in ani nga social ug mga kuan nga cultural nga mga influences. And also si Piaget, he never mentioned and he did not specify the psychological process nga naa sa atoang mind during the developmental stages nga iyang gi-mention katong 4 stages. I agree with Freire's theory. For example, you are imong problema is kaon, so dili gid ka ka-focus sa imong education. Sa dapat murag masulbad gyud unta una ang problem nimo prior ka nga makakaton gyud kag maayo. Kay if kuan ka, demoralize ka, walay inana nga kuan, di gid ka mo daghan kang problema, di ka ka-concentrate sa pag-eskwela. And then, for example, poverty, kanang mga gipanggutom nga mga bata. So, di ka focus sa pag-study. And then, disagree ko regarding sa katong I agree sa katong dapat ang teacher and student mag-work hand in hand to solve the problem and mas easier ang learning process, smooth ang process. However, I disagree kay if masubraan ang student pagka kuan, dapat equal lagi siya, di gid siya mo labaw sa iyang kuan. So that ends my report, ladies and gentlemen. I hope. And okay, we have already knew the cognitive development and the liberation pedagogy. So all we have to do as the future teachers we have to apply these theories during our classes. So I hope you learned something. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Have a nice day, everyone. God bless. Stay safe. So that, and I hope